Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and respected professional coming on The Brand Called You for a second time from New Delhi, India, Neena Chatrath. Neena, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here second time around.
Thank you. Neena is a partner of DHR Global. She serves on several boards and she's earlier spent time with several companies, including Heidrick and Struggles and Korn Ferry. So, Neena, we're going to talk about, professionals and careers and leadership today with you. Let me start by asking you what inspired you to transition from business leadership roles to becoming a trusted advisor and a board member?
I think it started with seeing the organization as a consultant. You're pretty close to what's going on strategically in a company. And earlier years of my professional life, I was very close to what was execution wise or implementation wise that was, sort of happening in an organization. And then you felt, what's the next logical step? Once you've gone through the execution piece, middle management, senior management, now you moved away, you're a consultant. What next? And very earlier on in my career, I had the opportunity to be with McKinsey for a hotel chain. So I knew that the conversations that happen at the top are significantly different from the rest of, the workings of day-to-day functioning. And it was just that thing that propelled me to say, what am I missing out on? I think it was more of curiosity. And as a consultant, being with, the best global brands, you're in any case privy to a lot of strategic thought process. But what really happens in the boardroom, you were just an invitee there. And I wanted to be part of that. I think that was my trigger and that was my inspiration.
Fascinating. And how has your work as an independent director played a role in enhancing your perspective on corporate governance?
Absolutely and significantly, it's been a so I do have a piece of my my professional experience where I did a lot of work in quality. And somehow you thought that quality would, give you a good perspective of compliances, regulations, what you ought to do, what the quality journey ought to
Mm,
be. But
mm,
this is very, very different. It's
mm.
significantly different. So when you are a board member and an independent director, ethical business practices, compliances, law of the land, regulatory, financial regulatory, and now India, I mean, I'm on Indian boards.
Mm,
So in India, I also see that there's been a huge amount of shift on in the last, maybe I would say, maybe ever since I've been there, I've seen that
mm.
there's an increasing focus on compliances and regulation and for organizations to abide by the law of the land.
Right.
And I think, and that is corporate governance at its best. So
Mm.
how do you propel independent, promoters
Yeah.
to think compliances, to
Mm.
think and say, let me pay what I need to pay, wherever I need to pay,
Yeah.
and let me be above the law. I think
Absolutely.
that's the shift I'm seeing. And there's a lot of enough and more SEBI
Correct.
guidelines or the Companies Act, which stipulates that you really ought to do that.
Great response. I agree. Could you also share a pivotal moment that shaped your philosophy around unlocking organizational capabilities?
I work in latter half of my being a consultant, I worked a lot with mid-sized companies. And in mid-sized companies, I realized, and I'm going to go to a specific example, where they're very aspirational. They really wanting to race ahead.
Mm.
Growth is very much part of it. And they at times don't know what to, they struggle. They
Mm.
experiment a lot. The organization capability is really looking at and saying, okay, what have I built up until now? What is the talent that I have? Looking ahead and saying, what is the talent I need?
Mm.
I may say I want to be the best R&D company in a specific niche space, but you're
Mm.
not getting the right talent. You're not doing the right, research piece to even make that happen. But
Right.
aspirationally, you're there.
Yeah.
So I think the pivotal moment was really about, working with an organization which is very aspirational in the safety space. And by we kept unlocking how can the organization be equipped to drive
Mm.
what you aspire to be?
Mhm.
And as opposed to you being behind the flock of sheep and pushing them ahead. So I think it was really mid-sized companies, aspirational companies, companies which had huge dreams. They kept calling it bhag, big, hairy, audacious goals.
Yeah.
But I think at times they don't know how to go about it.
You're
How do
right.
you set the right systems? How do you set the
Right.
right processes? The
Mm.
organization, if you put the sum total of all the people there and what you build, I think, how do you galvanize it
Correct.
to its highest, efficiency, I would call
Well
it.
said. I agree. And what, in your view, are some of the critical capabilities professionals must develop today to stay relevant and grow?
I've seen career many years where people could go deep. I have this niche space, I'll go deep. I'm in manufacturing, I understand manufacturing. Lo and behold, I'll get one foreign, tie up, alliance, I'll get my know how, I'll put in the machine. Today, it's about horizontal
Mm.
understanding. It's about what's going on in the world because
Yeah.
competition comes from anywhere and everywhere.
Mm. Mm.
It's about really knowing ahead of the curve what are some of the technologies which are moving at such a fast pace. How do I
Correct.
imbibe them? How do I understand them to begin with? How do I imbibe them, implement them in my organization?
Yeah.
And it's all around us. So I think the openness in individuals to be able to experiment and say, this is not in my book code of conduct, but you know what? It's doable.
Mm.
And I think that openness and agileness and the ability to deal with ambiguity, I may not have immediate answers, but how
Mm.
do I make it
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah.
I think that's critical. And I'm
Yeah.
finding that more and more youngsters, the second generation, the more and more they're in that growth mindset, which is great. But they're
Mm.
also willing to experiment and say, what can I bring in and morph the business going forward? Because
Mm.
businesses are not going to be the same as they are today. They're
Absolutely.
changing at a very fast pace.
Correct. 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 Well said. But what, in your view, are some of the common mistakes a lot of professionals tend to make that could stall their career growth?
Okay, so I could write a thesis on this. So we know that it's a pyramid,
Yeah.
whether we like it or not. And there are toll gates. And do people understand toll gates and their ability to be able to do different things differently?
Mm.
So as
Mm.
an individual contributor, great, I'm
Mm.
brilliant. And I don't want to give power away, so maybe I could go an SME route. But if I am taking the managerial route and I'm going through the toll gates, then to know at any point of time what is it that I need to develop. Getting work done out of other people is difficult. It's impossible. But
Mm.
how do you believe and how do you sort of you could either lead 8, 10 people, but
Yeah.
you can even have a full hierarchy under you. And
Mm.
do you know how to galvanize them? How do you know how to motivate them as a leader?
Right.
Do you inspire them? How you deal with your direct reports? How do you deal with others? So people are not able to get this, and then they're so good in what they do, but
Mm.
they're sidelined because managerially you need to make it happen through people. I
Mm.
think that's one of the bigger things. And the second
Correct.
thing is, I think people get stuck. They get stuck in a rut. They say, I'm really good at this, and I would like to continue doing that. But it is about imbibing the
Mm.
unknown. It's not
Mm.
about what you know, it's
Correct.
more about what you don't know.
Mm.
So I think getting stuck in a rut, getting stuck in one organization, one role, you may be doing a great job. But if
Mm.
I've been in the same role, same organization for like 6, 7 years, I've lost the plot. It's as
Yeah.
simple as that.
Absolutely.
So these are
Very
career
well.
stallers because,
Mm.
when I'm sitting in a jury and
Mm.
we're looking at professionals and saying, which one is going to make it happen? It's about lateral thinking. It's about growth mindset.
Mm.
It's about having galvanized larger forces as
Mm.
opposed to doing it yourself.
Very well said. But the other thing that I often hear from a lot of senior professionals who are, as you said very rightly, getting stuck or at maybe a toll gate, to use your term. How can senior professionals reinvent themselves in a market that is beginning to more and more value younger talent?
Yeah, you're so right in saying that. We just love younger talent. The younger, the better.
Yeah.
Even if they're 60, 70% ready. So I think it's about the senior leadership. I personally feel it's about awareness of that things are not going to be the same.
Hmm.
I think first it starts with a strong sense of self belief and self awareness and the willingness to experiment. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people are unwilling to experiment. Like,
Hmm.
the other day I was, as an independent director, I was talking to men in uniform. There were 60 of them in that room, and they were as senior as maybe the
Hmm.
vice chief of the
Hmm.
army staff, etc. And they're all looking at resettlement. And they're looking at, modern medicine is not going to let you go away in a hurry. You're
Mm.
already at 50, at 60, but how do you sort of jump off from here? So I see it as a parallel track. The parallel track could be one is that you look at the gig economy in a very significant way. I have something that I can contribute
Yeah.
meaningfully,
Mm.
and I am an SME and I can be an advisor to a few companies in a
Mm.
specific niche space.
Mm.
What I bring to the table is what they may not be able to afford from a full-time professional. The
Right.
second track could be that, I am really willing to look at CSR or DEI or the things that are coming up in a more significant way and
Mm.
actually walk into a board and
Right.
be an independent director. So I feel it's two ways, but you got to work ahead of time. You
Correct.
can't wait till you reach that point. A lot of them call me and I'm like talking to them. You can't be 60 and say, where do I start from?
Absolutely.
So it has to
Absolutely.
be ahead of time and planning and plotting and saying, what do I need to build into my career
Mm.
while I'm in a full-time job so that I continue to remain relevant.
Mm.
I think
Very
that's
well
the
said.
real
Very
thing.
well said. And therefore, a follow-up question for you is how important is personal branding for a lot of these senior executives who are looking for new roles?
I know, I know. I mean, just as we are talking, there is a gentleman whom I'm coaching. He's just about 60 and he ran a company very successfully in a very good space for about 11 years.
Mm.
And lo and behold, the company's decided to move away from India. So
Mm.
he's got like 6 months and he's not on any of, the social media. He's not even known. He's known in his industry in a very niche way, but
Mm.
maybe the next job or opportunity may not come from there. So I
Right.
think it's important. I no, I don't think it's important. I think it is very important.
Mm.
But how you go about it is also very important.
Mm.
I can't be constantly there and just building my portfolio at the back of low content. Yeah, I
Mm.
think people see through that. I
Yeah.
think I content needs to be right and correct,
Mm.
and you can build on that and build on it in a measured, significant way. Because I think when somebody's beating the drum too much, I think it's very off-putting.
Mm.
So
Well said.
how you look at it as personal
Very.
branding, how do you sort of build on it? It's
Yeah.
it's important. It's
Correct.
definitely
Correct.
important. Yeah, yeah.
Correct. So, we've spoken about these senior or older executives. Next few questions are is for younger and next gen leaders. And my question is, what unique challenges do young promoters or next gen leaders typically face when stepping into leadership roles?
Oh, it's so much has been written and talked about it, but you're coming into a family, there's family relationships to be strengthened, for lack of a better word, or need to be at least
Yeah.
contained.
Yeah.
And you're moving into a work dimension, you want to experiment, you're young, you
Mm.
should be allowed to experiment, but you also have to take people along with you. There's at times lesser acceptance from the organization to you as a decision maker. So I think some of them have done it very well. Go
Mm.
through the grind, be one amongst them, then become first amongst equals and walk in there. The
Mm.
moment you are airdropped from the top, nobody likes it. It's going to be a tougher journey. You
Mm.
may be very bright, but you need to align with your people at the end of the
Mm.
day. You need to align with the business. You,
Correct.
you need to align with the ecosystem.
Mm.
And so that's one. Two is, I think the youngsters also they need to look at things. It's a very complex world. It's
Mm.
increasingly complex.
Mm.
So they're going to find newer opportunities, and it can be at the back of the foundation that your forefathers and your generations have built, but
Mm.
it has to be a segue away
Correct.
from that.
Correct.
Because business as we know it are not going to be there. So how do you segue? So
Mm.
make yourself, sort of current, relevant. Get your, a lot of the second gen or the third gen are
Mm.
getting their degrees, but how are you
Mm.
putting those degrees to good use?
Mm.
Get your educational qualification, do short-term courses, and keep on learning and saying the people aspect. The people
Mm.
aspect is the toughest aspect, and that's
Correct.
my learning of 40 years. Everything else is doable. You can,
Yeah.
bring intellect into everything, but how do you sort of take people along? You call it soft skills. I think it's
Mm.
a horrible word to use. These are
Mm.
the hardest to acquire.
Correct.
But how do you take, even a senior, maybe your senior most person is 20 years older than you, but you have to take him along with you. You have to give him his space or her space and take them along with you.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think you have to galvanize everybody's good energies into the organization. I think that takes some doing.
Well
That
said.
takes
Well
some
said.
learning, actually.
But a follow-up again question for you is that do you think a lot of these younger or next-gen leaders should approach governance and long-term strategy differently from their earlier generations?
See, I would look at it saying that I'll even divide the next gen into two categories. One is like learn the business, learn the ropes,
Hmm.
get there, be in the organization. So I think don't think about corporate governance just yet.
Hmm.
I think it has to be a grind. Eventually, corporate governance will start making sense. Eventually, strategy will start making sense. You
Hmm.
can't come there with I've come from XYZ and, I've come with a strategy and it's going to work. Understand the organization.
Yeah.
And I think to the point that you're absolutely right. The people who have already been in the saddle for a while,
Hmm.
I'm finding them being a lot more aware and a lot more open to saying, I'm going to abide by the law of the land.
Hmm.
And I think that shift I am seeing, I think they're more, I don't want to generalize, but I
Hmm.
think they're more attuned to saying, I'm comfortable,
Correct.
paying off X amount if
Yeah.
it needs to be
Yeah.
done towards the state or the center, as the case may be. And
Hmm.
they're sort of more comfortable with that. I think
Yeah.
they're born into more money. They've not seen what their
Yeah.
fathers have seen, right? So
Absolutely.
the money can go easily.
Yeah. 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 In fact, I've heard a lot of the the next gen leaders often say that, I'd rather do everything that I'm supposed to do and not get that midnight knock on my door.
See?
So,
Rightly said.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Why would they? Why would they? So
absolutely.
I'll give you an example. It's a very
Hmm.
interesting
Yeah.
example. I'm
Yeah.
working with an organization where they had a tax raid,
Hmm.
right? So I'm not giving out the name of the
Yeah.
organization, so
Absolutely. Hmm. Yeah.
confidentiality is
Yeah.
intact.
Yeah.
They had a tax raid, and the way the father looked at the tax rate and the way the son looked at the tax rate was like, I can't tell you how diametrically
Correct.
opposite their views were.
Yes. Yes.
And I couldn't believe it. But the father kept saying, let's, gloss it over, let's pay off and all. And the guy said, no, dad, let's just clean the shit.
Hmm.
Pardon my French, but he just said,
Absolutely.
no, let's just clean it up. How?
Yeah.
What's your problem?
Yeah.
And they really went loggerheads on this one. And
Hmm.
it was fine by me. And then they called me and said, what do you suggest now? I'm like caught in this quagmire between the father and the son. I'm wedged in between. I thought
Correct.
a bit of this and a bit of that would
Yeah.
be fine. But I
Hmm.
think the son had his way. He said, no, this
Correct.
is a good time as any. Let's just do this.
Correct. 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 Absolutely. Well said. My next question is, and a couple of questions for you on organizational culture. What, in your view, are some of the non negotiable elements of a strong organizational culture? And what are some early warning signs of a toxic culture? And this could also really, be a part of organizational governance, which creates challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let me take a pause over here on the culture part, right? And I'm just currently in a very interesting project where we are revamping or relooking at the culture from a different lens. And what I've learned is that, the way people, professionals operate and the way they work, the lines are blurred. There's
Mm,
no such thing as, there's this fine line and, this is work and this is life. It's all integrated. It's all 24/7. And therefore, there's a lot of casualness that has unnecessarily crept into their work life also. The
mm.
way they operate, the way they have coffees, or, whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
it could be a bigger dimension.
Mm,
But it's impacting the discipline of the organization,
mm,
the decorum of the organization.
mm,
How we used to measure work is very different today. So either the organization gets comfortable with this fluidity of, anytime, anywhere, whatever they do, is it fine by us? Or are you going to bring in a very strict culture here?
mm.
So one is this whole amalgamation of how do we want things to be? I think there's a code of conduct is important.
Yeah.
How do we function is important. Otherwise, measuring performance is going to be a challenge for anybody. I'm just
Mm,
putting it very simply.
yeah.
Okay, now let me go to the toxic culture part. I think the toxic culture is very much a part of India. And there are times when I've refused work because I walked into organizations not liking the smell of
Correct.
decisions. And I think we've had situations where youngsters have not been able to adjust to it. They're coming
Mm,
from college, they're coming from wherever. I think the lens would be I'm coming here. I have ideas. I'm an individual. I'm an adult. I want to contribute. That's the
Mm.
way. That's my lens.
Yeah.
But you can't throttle them at the this thing of you're going to work 20 hours and all that. We've all done it, but
Mm.
we've done it with the logic behind it. We haven't done it because that's the norm, and thou shall stay with the norm. And I think the
Mm.
toxicity builds with that.
Mm.
There's also a lot of sadism at times, in the organization. Those are the
Yeah.
companies that don't want. I don't wish to
Mm.
work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is a toxic culture. What
Mm.
does it take to change that toxic culture? I've tried it in an organization. I hope I succeed. But having those conversations is also extremely difficult
Absolutely.
because they're not willing to see it for what it is.
Mm. Very well
The
said.
second part that you said that, yeah, it does lead to corporate governance. Yeah, the right kind of culture, I do the things right.
Nina, I have time for two more questions for you.
Sure.
My next question is, how can organizations maintain strategic momentum during periods of rapid expansion?
A very interesting question. Um, Strategy is sort of just thrown out of the window. Growth is right, numbers are right.
Mm.
Why do we even need to look at the strategy? Or maybe it is an underlying strategy which is making that growth happen. It's
Mm.
both ways, right?
Mm.
So there are times when you're in a right space, right time, and things are working for you.
Mm.
But is the leadership looking ahead of the curve? I
Mm.
think that's the real question. And I think a lot of times companies will put a couple of strategy people there who are really watching out for the futuristic trends and
Mm.
seeing, are we missing out on something? Because
Mm.
if you don't do that, then one fine day it doesn't take time for something to just, like look at
Right.
this whole US tariff
Correct.
situation we're talking
Correct.
about today. It doesn't take much. Just one signature on something that's going to be carried out, and poof, your business may just go through the window. Either your imports will be too expensive or whatever the case may be. There are
Mm.
many, many scenarios here. So I think scenario building, strategic thinking is critical. And I think people do recognize that.
Mm.
But when it is center stage is when the chips are down.
Right. Right.
And that's the place when you don't want to be there.
Correct. Correct.
So
Correct.
it is critical, but maybe the frequency of those strategic
Mm.
discussions could be a little less,
Very
while
interesting.
growth is happening.
Very interesting. And my last question for you, Nina.
Sure.
What advice would you offer to young business owners or young leaders about building a leadership pipeline early?
I'm a believer when people come in from when you intake professionals and they
Mm.
could be from coming from their institutes, etc.
Yeah.
You need to do the spotting at that time.
Yeah.
Definitely, you need to spot your talent, leadership talent, much ahead of time. You see
Mm.
promise there. You see people who are rebelling, people who are asking the right questions or the tough questions are the ones who need to be nurtured and taken
Mm.
along because
Mm.
those are the ones you want to build in a positive way rather than have them become negative and then they just kind of leave the organization. And
Mm.
I don't think there's any CEO who would not be thinking about this
Mm.
because succession overtly, covertly is a very much a part of an
Mm.
organization's DNA. Whether you do it as a journey or as an event depends upon the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have to keep building the pipeline. You have to keep giving them the right kind of experiences
Mm.
because while they get the right experiences, the classical European companies
Mm.
gave everyone the right experience till they reached a point where they could be independently running lines of businesses. They
Right.
didn't need any oversight.
Well
And I
said.
remember, not the best example, but even Nokia, for that matter, said, "What is the experience bag that you have? Oh, you have supply chain missing. You have a small country, leadership missing." So they would see all those experiences, put that in a bag, and say, "Let's build that up," right?
Mm.
So it is important. It's critical. It is
Absolutely.
critical.
Absolutely. And on that note, Nina, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me again about your amazing knowledge on the corporate world, on people, on culture, on leadership, and on governance. Thank
Thank
you
you
for
so
speaking
much,
to me.
Ashutosh. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you
Take
again.
care.
Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.